Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Welcome to another session of Finding God. We are still on chapter 47, part 2. This is Surah Ash-Shu'ara, which means the poets, and this is the second part. This is a very long chapter, um, around 227, 228 verses. Um, and last week I covered the first part. I've divided it into four separate quarters, and I covered the first part last week, talking about the story of Moses. Um, and the Bible discusses it in a lot of detail in Exodus and the books that follow. But in the Quran, it is summarized and it is built upon that previous knowledge. So if you want to look into it further, you can look at Quranic references and tafsir, which we call the the detailed discussion on the topic. And if you're into it, because this is what I do, I look at the other books as well. So if you want to read the biblical account, you can start with the Exodus and then just go forth from there. This chapter is very interesting because although it started by talking about Muhammad, don't worry about the poets, don't do this, don't do that, don't worry about this, and remind them of the story of Moses. Did we not help them? All that. The rhetorical narrative technique that God uses in the Quran. Um, then it's stories of prophets or great men who have existed in our history. And it started with Moses, and then today it will be Abraham and Noah, and then next week it would be Hud and Lot and others, and then finally it's a whole wrap up. So it's a lot of storytelling being sprinkled around um, in these chapters. Now, if you remember from a few weeks ago, um, there were just some clear messages like this is right, this is wrong, this is heaven, this is hell, this is what you need to do. And then some of them are these poetic long stories of tales and fables, or I wouldn't say fables, but tales and stories and narratives which are shared and then explored further. Um, this is one of those chapters which dives into a lot of detail. So we covered the story of Moses, but I was speaking to this. Uh, I was speaking about this with my father recently. In fact, this morning, that Abraham doesn't have a religion tied to him. Um, Moses has Judaism, Jesus has Christianity, Muhammad has Islam, Siddharth Gautam Buddha has Buddhism, Hinduism has an old civilizational history, Zarathustra has Zoroastrianism, Guru Nanak has Sikhism. There's many founders of religion who've been great men or great people who've existed throughout history. Abraham does not really have a religion tied to him, but he's considered the grandfather of the Israelites and all these religions. So these three, which dominate the world in terms of population, are called the Abrahamic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, because uh, Moses came from the line of Abraham, and so did Jesus, and so did Muhammad. And Moses. Why is my mic? Hello? All right. Yeah, it's causing some troubles. I hope my mic doesn't cause any troubles. So Abraham's son, Isaac, and in Islam we also believe Isaac, Ishmael or Ismail, and a third son, but the third son hasn't been explored in a lot of detail. But Isaac and Ishmael, and from Isaac came Jacob, and from Jacob came Joseph and Benjamin, and from them came. Is my mic? Why is my mic being muted? I didn't understand. I don't understand what's going on here. Um, this seems to be my microphone. Hello. I don't know why it's causing trouble. Anyway, I'll just continue with the book. Um, Another word for Jacob is Israel. So the children of Jacob are also called the children of Israel. That's how the name is derived. Maybe there are other derivations, but that's the one that I know. Um, so Abraham is a very, very important person in history. but he doesn't have a religion tied to him. He's a father of the three major faiths. Like Hinduism, I wouldn't call it a major faith. It's a huge faith, but it isn't spread across the world. It's concentrated in India and maybe other small parts of the world. It's concentrated. There may be nearly 1 billion Hindus in the world, and I love and respect a lot of them. Um, Abraham was Hanif. Okay, what does that mean? Amina Ben Mohub. Please explain in your comment because I'm going to start reading soon. So Hinduism, doesn't. It's concentrated. So I don't say it's one of the three major religions that are spread across the world, but Judaism, Christianity, and Islam definitely are. And Abraham is called the grandfather or the father of them. So he's an important person. But every time I think about it, I say, why wasn't he given a religion to preach? And I don't know if I have an answer to that. But I will start reading from verse 69, and I'll continue on from there. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. So we discussed the story of Moses last week, and then it says, and recite to them the story of Abraham when he said to his father and his people, what do you worship? So if you're not familiar with the story of Abraham, he was in a time when they would worship idols, and there's a wonderful story of how he challenged their beliefs. There's a lovely story about how he did it, and then how he grew up, and he was a formidable thinker and a formidable man, and he grew up into that. They said, we worship idols, and to them we are ever devoted. He said, do they hear you when you call on them? Now, to all my fellow human beings who worship idols, you have to understand the religious perspective. This is Islam. In Islam, there is no idol worship, there is no picture drawing, there is no painting. Those things don't exist. So, what I'm reading here is the Islamic perspective. So, if it causes offense or if it causes you to question yourself, don't go down that route. This is a religion. This is a reading of the Quran. Okay, the Quran is the book of Muslims, and I've had discussions with close friends of mine who are Hindu, and they've told me why they worship. Some of them do worship idols, some of them don't. So I don't want this to be a point of contention. This is one book. You have your own books, which I'll get to in a few years, hopefully. But just take it as a religious book rather than something to contend against. That would be my honest advice. Um, do they hear you when you call on them, or do they benefit you, or do they harm you? They said, nay, but we found our fathers doing so. That's how a lot of the world works. Why do you do that? Well, my dad did it this way. Well, my mum did it this way. So you're like, okay, I'll just do it the same way. That's how human beings are wired. Uh, he said, do you observe that which you have been worshipping, you and your ancient fathers? Verily, they are enemies to me, except the Lord of the Alamin, which is mankind, jinn, and all that exists, who has created me, and it is he who guides me, and it is he who feeds me and gives me to drink. And when I am ill, it is he who cures me, and who will cause me to die, and then will bring me to life again, and who I hope will forgive me my faults on the day of recompense, the day of resurrections. My Lord, bestow hukam, which means religious knowledge, right judgment of the affairs and prophethood, on me, and join me with the righteous, and grant me an honorable mention in later generations, and make me one of the inheritors of the paradise of delight, and forgive my father, verily he is of the errand. This is a prayer of Abraham. It's a very important prayer in the Quran, I have to tell you. It's a very respected prayer. Look at it, I'll just say it again. My Lord, give me this religious knowledge, bestow it on me, and join me, put me in the company of the righteous people, and grant me honorable mentions in later generations. That is happening, Mr. Abraham. And make me one of the inheritors of the paradise of delight, and forgive my father. Verily, he is of the erring. That's a great prayer for himself and then also for his father. Now that's a difficult relationship. Prophet Muhammad had this with his uncles as well, because he loved them dearly, but they didn't convert to Islam. So he would always he was told not to. You can't force somebody to become Muslim. You can't. By design, you can't. There have been people who have done so, but Islam is not a religion that is supposed to be spread by force. If it were, it wouldn't need all this argumentation. It wouldn't need all this rationalization and thought and exploration. If it were to be spread by force, you'd say, follow it or die. Admittedly, perhaps some kings have done that. Perhaps some conquerors have done that. But the religion by design isn't meant to be spread by force. So the Prophet couldn't force his uncles to become Muslim. And that was a big trouble point for him. So even here, Abraham is begging for forgiveness for his father. And disgrace me not on the day when all the creatures will be resurrected, the day whereon neither wealth nor sons will avail, except who brings to God a clean heart, which means clear from polytheism here, and nifaq, clear from hypocrisy, it says. And paradise will be brought near to the muttaqun, the pious, and the hellfire will be placed in full view of the erring. And it will be said to them, where are those, the false gods, whom you used to set up as rivals with God, that you used to worship? Instead of God, can they help you or even help themselves? Now, the Quran has discussed this multiple times. Multiple times. Like on the day of judgment, you will be placed here, you'll see the beautiful light of paradise, and you will feel the unbearable heat of hell, and you will see all of it, and the good will go here and the bad will go there, and then these people go here, these people don't, these people in the middle. That's been discussed repeatedly. And I wonder why it's repeated, because there have been chapters which have described it in great detail. And I wonder why it's repeated so much. Something is repeated because it's important. Something is repeated because the person repeating or the text repeating wants it to be taken as important. Or perhaps every time it's repeated, something more is given. But if I were to say to you, what is the thing that is repeated the most in the Quran? One of them, so far in the last 47 chapters, has been hell, day of judgment, paradise. What happens to you after you die is a central theme. And I've been saying this since week 1, week 2, if you recall, chapter 1, chapter 2, where I said that they're constantly going back to, well, this is what is going to happen to you if you don't follow this path. And then the other path was being loving to the poor, to the weak, to the orphans. That was one theme, and this was the other theme. Now that one theme has gone. It has been sufficiently sprinkled in the earlier chapters, so it becomes part of the religion. And now there's a lot of storytelling. There's a lot of, this is the right way to do things, this wrong way to do things. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of, oh, there's 3 types of people. Oh, that's one person. What if this happens? There's a lot of that. But the theme of day of resurrection, day of recompense, hell, heaven, right, wrong, that is continuing from the beginning of the chapters. And I wonder why this theme continues, but the one about being nice to the poor, the weak, the orphans, that kind of fizzled out after the first 20 chapters or so. But this other theme of hell and day of judgment and paradise, right and wrong, is continuing. Either this is more powerful, or it's a strong rhetorical device, or both true. But I also think this is a message that comes easy, but it also leaves easy. So if you tell me to be nice to the poor, not nice, kind to the poor, giving to the poor, the weak, the orphans, the disenfranchised, I wouldn't resist it. I'd be like, okay, yeah, it's a good thing to do. All right, I'll do it. Okay, yeah, I've been poor. I know people who are poor. I know people who are rich. To give of my wealth, of my strength, of my effort and time, I can do that. It's not a hard sell. This, on the other hand, is, I wouldn't even call it a hard sell. It is an impossible sell because we forget every single time. But countless members of every religion, myself included, who sometimes get struck by this religious thunder and fall in love with God and say, "Oh, I'm going to pray and I will not do anything wrong and I'll be the greatest Muslim that I can be." A week or so goes by and we start missing a prayer. And we start delaying one and we miss a fast and we don't give our charity for that month and we badmouth someone else or we lie a bit or we indulge in some adultery, just mild adultery, and then the mild becomes semi-mild and then it becomes moderate and so forth. So you need to be reminded again, and then you say, "Oh yeah, I'll self-correct again." And then a couple of weeks pass by and you start fizzling down again. This is a message that needs to be reminded to us almost every day and maybe multiple times a day, which is exactly why Muslims pray 5 times a day. I don't. I'm horrible at it. I wish I were better. And every time I decide to be better, I am better for a few days and then the discipline breaks. But one of the purposes of praying multiple times a day is so you remember this, that I need to be reminded that this life is finite. I'm not invincible, infinite, omnipotent, omnipresent. I'm not any of those things. I could die right now on camera, live. I could die right now, right? But I behave as if I'll live forever. We have a very short memory. I think that is why this message is repeated. I'll continue. Then they will be thrown on their faces into the fire. Then they and the Ghamun, which means devils, and those who are in error, and the whole hosts of Satan together, they will say while contending therein, "By God, we were truly in a manifest error when we held you, false gods, as equals in worship with the Lord of the Alameen," which means of mankind. And none has brought us into error except the Mujrimun, which is Satan, and those human beings who commit murders, polytheism, and so forth. Now we have no intercessors nor a close friend to help us. Alas, if we only had a chance to return to the world, we shall truly be among the believers. Verily, in this is indeed a sign, yet most of them are not believers. When it is too late, everybody regrets. I wish I had not argued with my father on the last phone call I had with him. I wish I hadn't shouted at my mother. I wish I hadn't been so rude to my husband or my wife. I wish I had told my son and daughter that I love them right before they got hit by a train, or right before their plane crashed, or right before they suffered a stroke. When it's too late, we all regret. Here, when you're in the hellfire, it's too late. Your time, our time to repent and fix is now. It's not later, it's now. But we didn't do it. Alas, if we only had a chance to return to the world, we shall truly be among the believers. Verily, in this is indeed a sign, yet most of them are not believers. Exactly. And verily, your Lord is truly the Almighty, the most merciful. The people of Noah denied the messengers. When their brother Noah said to them, "Will you not fear God and obey him? I am a trustworthy messenger to you, so fear God. Keep your duty to him and obey me. No reward do I ask of you for it." By it he means Islamic monotheism. My reward is only from the Lord of the Alameen. So keep your duty to God, fear him, and obey me. It's a fine request from Noah. He's doing exactly what everybody after him will do. Abraham will do it, and Jesus and Moses and Muhammad will do it, and Hud and Salah would do it, Jacob would do it, and Joseph and Benjamin would do it, and Job would do it. They would all do the same thing. They said, "Shall we believe in you when the meat of the people follow you?" why would we believe in you? Isn't this the case all the time, though? Many times, rather than judging the merit of the argument, you say, well, I don't listen to you because blah, blah, blah listens to you. Oh, I don't like Donald Trump. It's an example. I'm not comparing them to religions. Don't focus variables, focus on the concept. I don't like Donald Trump because Alex Jones and Steve Bannon support him. Well, okay. Yeah, those two are maybe idiots, but let's look at what Donald Trump is saying and judge him for his merits rather than who else listens to him. If on merit you find him to fall short or incorrect, by all means don't follow him. But don't just decide not to follow somebody or listen to somebody because who else listens to him. Oh, I don't listen to them because that person. No. Where's your mind? That's an unevolved, unenlightened judgment. You can do better than that. Shall we believe in you when the meanest of the people follow you? He said, and what knowledge have I of what they used to do? Their account is only with my Lord, if you could but know. And I am not going to drive away the believers. I'm only a plain warner. Same thing that Moses said, same thing that Muhammad says. It's the same thing every single time. They said, if you cease not, O Noah, you will surely be among those stoned to death. He said, my Lord, verily my people have denied me. Therefore judge you between me and them, and save me and those of the believers who are with me. And we saved him and those with him in the laden ship. And we drowned the rest, disbelievers thereafter. Verily in this is indeed a sign, yet most of them are not believers. And verily your Lord, he is indeed the Almighty, the most merciful. I'll stop here, verse number 122, because I've covered the stories of Abraham and Noah today. Last week we covered Moses. These are three of the most important people in Islam and in Christianity, maybe even Judaism, the very important people in human history, I'd say. And the message is always the same. The message is always giving a warning about something and not receiving agreement in return. I tend to think about things and reflect upon them consciously and sometimes subconsciously as well. There are things. All right, Al Hanafi is to be a true believer, which confirms to him with nature. It is straight without deviation. Abraham found finally after long we said that there is just one God. All right, thank you, Amina, for your contribution. Thank you so much. So there are things that I think about regarding, because I'm reading the Quran. It is one of the holy books. It has, there are almost 2 billion Muslims in the world. It's a fourth of the global population today. We're larger than we've ever been, as far as I recall. And I wonder, there are some mistakes that we're making as a civilization, and then there are many mistakes we're making as smaller groups. We have variations of warners today. There are people who warn us about sexual behavior. There are people who warn us about identity. There are people who warn us about greed. There are people who warn us about racial disparity or inequality, power asymmetry, weakness and strength, loving family, not loving family, mindfulness, mindlessness, strength, training, non-training. There are people who are warning us, advising us, counseling us all the time. Sometimes we listen to some, many times we don't listen to any. And I think there isn't enough cohesion in people. And although that's celebrated, this diversity in abundance mindset, I think as a species, there are some things we need to align on, which we were maybe 50 years ago, maybe 100 years ago. We're not anymore. It feels quite disparate and separated. I'm not saying that I'm pessimistic about it, because I know where I stand on everything. I'm not confused about any of my perspectives. But what I'm seeing in the world is that problems are happening between people, and instead of understanding it or critically analyzing it, we're all locked in echo chambers. And social media hasn't helped. Social media just strengthens your echo chamber even further. So if you like listening to, what's his name? Oh, I forgot his name. Jordan Peterson. You only listen to Jordan Peterson and similar figures. If you like listening to Slavoj Žižek, you listen to Slavoj Žižek and other speakers like Slavoj. Or Sam Harris. If you like Sam Harris, then you'll end up listening to similar people like Sam Harris. But I wonder if we could have an open contestation of ideas constantly, and then take the ideas that we used to have of what's right and wrong, and critically analyze them, and agree, maybe not 100% agree, but let's say 95% agree on this behavior is good for us, this behavior is not. Right now, it's becoming too much of a tapestry of opinions, and tapestries aren't beneficial in any regard. So at least that's how I view the world. But yeah, this book was compiled 1400 years ago, 1300 years ago. It was compiled a long time ago. But as Muslims, we believe it is eternal. And everything that is mentioned here, I can apply even today. I look at it and I say, yeah, whether it's a direct application or a derivation of the application, it doesn't matter. It's applicable today. So I look at it and I say, oh, at that time, things were somewhat different, but essentially human beings are the same. There's right and there's wrong. There's things that are good for us and things that are not so good for us, and things that are essentially bad for us, and we indulge in certain actions. And these books and messages or ideas, they try to help us mitigate the bad and indulge in what's better. But perhaps by the end of the Quran, which is another 60 weeks or so, 70 weeks or so, or even more, I might have a clearer answer of what we can do about it. But I'm going to stop here, 27 minutes. Thank you so much for joining me for part 2 of Surah Shuara. I shall see you next week. Have a wonderful Friday and a wonderful weekend, and a wonderful Christmas to all those celebrating.